Alright, in this video I'll be replacing the sand filter completely for my pool. I was just going to replace the sand or the internals because I noticed it wasn't doing a very good job of filtering anything really. And then when I opened the top I noticed that the actual internal components of the filter were in pieces, which would explain why it wasn't really filtering anything. So none of the water was likely going through the sand. It was just sitting on top and sort of recirculating instead of actually filtering anything. The internal parts were 170 with a 1 month backlog, but they did have the whole thing in stock for 360 and I was able to get it straight away. So I don't have to waste a full month of the summer waiting for the components. The other thing is the multi-port valve may not be good on my old one. So here's the new one. You can see it comes with this handy cardboard thing to help with filling up the sand filter with sand. It comes with a new multi-port valve, obviously the large jug to put the sand in. It comes with a clamp for the multi-port valve as well as a rubber O-ring gasket. It does come with a few fittings, some Teflon tape, and you probably need more Teflon tape than you think. And it also comes with the base that it sits on and a piece of flexible hose. A couple side things that you need: a shop vac to get the sand out of the old filter and a level, and a couple other things, maybe a hammer, screwdriver. I had to remove some boards. Technically you could probably roll this out without removing the sand, but because it has about 250 pounds of sand, I don't want it to hit my air conditioning lines and damage them. So I'm just going to take about half of the sand out and then I'll roll it out so that I don't damage anything. There's no real trick to this. Obviously you should drain the water first and then you can just use the shop vac to remove the sand from the top. And I did about 3 shop vacs full of sand. And there's probably about 100 pounds of sand remaining in this 22-inch tank. And you can see the internal components were broken all the way down. The new one I got is a 21-inch filter instead of a 22-inch filter, which is sized correctly for my pool. One thing I did use some of the old sand for is just doing some leveling. You can see that I put a new cement pad in there. I had to sort of chip the edge down so it would fit properly. No big deal there. And just using some of that old sand just to make sure that it's sitting on something level instead of how the old one was. So I'll put the base for the sand filter on top of the concrete pad, and then obviously I'll take the sand filter and place it on the pad. I am going to put the wood side back on, so I got to make sure that the drain valve is positioned correctly. And before you start adding water or sand, you want to look in and make sure that all of the laterals are down, because they can lift up, and that is not what you want before you start putting the sand in. It's recommended that you fill the filter halfway with water before putting the sand in so it doesn't damage the laterals. You can see that I've put that piece of cardboard back in, and that's to protect sand from going in the center pipe. It also keeps the center pipe centered within your sand filter, which is important when you go to put the multi-port valve on. That thing has to be centered, and if it was off to the side you would have a great deal of difficulty getting that multi-port valve in. For this 21-inch filter, I'm putting in 88 kilograms of sand, which is 4 bags. The size of the sand bags may vary, but it should be stamped on the side of your filter how much sand it requires to properly fill it. One thing to make sure is that when you remove the cover that you have on your center pipe, that you don't knock sand in. And you can see me just moving the sand and water around on the top a little bit to make sure that it's sort of leveled off. This one is a plastic clamp, and I put it on the filter before putting the multi-port valve on. The old one is more like a mechanical hose clamp, but they function the same, and that is to keep the multi-port valve attached to the filter. Now this large O-ring does not come on the multi-port valve, it comes in a bag separate, and you have to add that on. The other thing I'm going to do is use this Hayward's O-ring and gasket lubricant, and I'm going to put that on the O-ring as well before installing the multi-port valve onto the top of the filter. And then since the center pipe is centered in the filter, the multi-port valve should slide over the center pipe and then straight into position, which it does. So obviously that piece of cardboard is very helpful. If you have it, I recommend you keep it for when you have to add more sand in the future. And you're going to want to make sure that all the hose connections are positioned in a good spot when you put the multi-port valve on and before you tighten it up. And then for tightening the clamp, it just has 2 screws on each side, and just tighten it so it is holding your multi-port valve in securely, and that will help prevent leaks. You can also see that I've already hooked up the hose that goes to the pump, and all I had to do was thread the 1.5 inch 90-degree elbow in with a whole bunch of Teflon tape and then connect the hose. For the pressure valves, you're supposed to use a wrench. They do not advise that you tighten it by hand. I did find it a little bit painful, but perhaps these pliers were not the best thing to use. The 90-degree elbow for the waste port goes on the exact same way I did the one for the pump. That is, put on a whole bunch of Teflon tape and then just screw it into place. You don't need tools or anything to put these on. Just by hand should be more than adequate. I actually do this process over 2 days because I don't have the connector pipe to connect this flex hose to the return line on the multi-port valve. So I'm going to hold off for that portion for the next day, and I'm going to go back to the store to get a couple more pieces. So now I'm going to hook up the backwash hose. So you can see I got the backwash hose going out to the road. So now they advise that you backwash your filter for 2 minutes and then rinse it for 1 minute before actually turning it on and having it return water to your pool. And that's just so you don't get a big blast of sand dust into your pool from the new sand that you've put in your filter. And you can see the water coming out of there is still pretty brown with sort of that really fine sand dust that's coming out. I actually do this process twice. So I backwash it for 2 minutes, rinse for 1 minute, and then I backwash for 1 minute and then rinse for 1 minute. But the recommendation in the user manual is to do a 2-minute backwash and a 1-minute rinse, and that's it. And again, just like on backwash, the rinse setting will discharge the water out the backwash hose rather than having it return to your pool. So as long as the water coming out is clear and doesn't have a bunch of brown sand coming out with it, it should be good to go to hook everything up. So this is the next day, and I'm going to cut the semi-rigid 1.5-inch hose off a little bit lower, and then I'm going to cut a piece of the flexible hose off and put it on. So you can see that I've got a few connectors and hose clamps to help me set this up. I've cut the semi-rigid hose off and put the first fitting in with a couple of hose clamps on it, and now I'm going to take the flexible hose and add that as well. And you can see how that'll fit in there. So again, you got to add a few hose clamps, clamp all that down, and now that it's got that quick disconnect, it should actually be easier to connect and disconnect for the next time I want to change the sand. And once again, anywhere there's a rubber O-ring, I use some of that Hayward's gasket, O-ring and gasket lubricant. So now I'll move it from the rinse to the filter setting, and I'll go check out the jets and make sure that everything turns on. It does take a little bit of time because the pump has to prime, and as well there's a lot of air in the system that needs to be worked out. And as you can see on the first jet, once all the air works its way out of the system, it filters fine. Now the water in the pool looks fairly clean in this video. However, after 6 hours of running the filter, it was very noticeably cleaner. I did notice that there were a few water drips out of some of the fittings. However, after running the pump for about an hour or two, all of those very tiny leaks had stopped and it's running fine now. Overall, this job was pretty easy. I would say if you had all of the parts on hand and didn't have to do a whole bunch of trips back and forth to the pool supply store, it would probably only take 3 or 4 hours from start to finish to sort everything out, only because I had to go back and forth to the pool supply store a few times and just get a few extra fittings after I got the new filter in. It did take, obviously, about a day and a half of intermittent work to get everything done up. I'm happy that I got the pool up and running quickly and that I didn't have to wait a month for parts. I'm a little disappointed that I had to pay $360 plus tax to do it. But in the end, the kids are going to be happy, and I guess that's what matters here. Anyway, thanks for checking out the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.